Your fury is your focus. Feed it into a single point and maintain your control, commanded a voice that sounded as though it came from two places at once. He was tall and threatening. His eyes were white stars, and his face was dark as the void. Smoking hair cascaded down his back as he stood, his dark coat undulating in strange fashions as he stared coldly before him. A small ball floated in the air. It had long since gone past the point of being fire. Instead, it was energy in its purest form, as a white shell formed around a blue center. It was no larger than a thumbnail, but the heat it generated not only caused flames, but erased any solid object around it in a 3-meter radius. Any object, except for the man who wielded it. A ragged cloak hung down over his shoulders, and a hood hid his face in a dark shadow, save for a pair of glowing red eyes and sharp teeth that were clenched as his attention was kept purely on the orb. His chest heaved as sweat dripped from his body from exertion.
"What is the essence of strength?"
the dark figure stated in deep tones.
"True strength comes from restraint,"
the man replied, his voice ragged as the clothes he wore. The figure walked with feet that made no sound in a room that was no room. Worlds warped and shifted in an endless chasm that changed in color and warped around the sphere of energy. His eyes were focused on his pupil, who, despite his tiredness, remained stalwart in his control.
"What is the essence of power?"
A deep breath came from the ragged man as he shifted the position of his hands. He was steady in his motions, and as he moved, so did the sphere. As the sphere moved, so did the veil of worlds that surrounded the two of them.
"True power comes from control,"
he hissed through his teeth. The dark figure placed his hands behind his back as he watched the man's head turn to face him. The two locked eyes as energy sparked in the air.
"What is the essence of knowledge?" "True knowledge,"
the man stated plainly,
"comes from failure." "Strike me,"
the dark figure commanded. In a snap of emotion, the cloaked man spun. His arm moved with precision and his body with grace as the white-blue sphere circled around him in a sudden movement. The figure held a single hand out as it flew towards his form, and the two forces collided. Energy cracked the world around the two of them, and the room that was not a room became chaotic and wild. Stars flew past them that exploded in a multitude of supernovas. Lives flashed in an instant only to be snuffed out. Trees grew from saplings to die on a mountaintop, only to fade to dust as planets dissipated. Nebulas of stars exploded out in a cycle that never ended. The two stared each other down, their poses never changing as the figure held the sphere at bay with the palm of his hand. Sparks of energy hissed where his hand met the object.
"What is the point of your strength?"
the figure howled as eternity flew by the two.
"My strength is required to put my power down,"
the man roared in defiance, his arms trembling from the strain.
"What is the point of your power?"
the figure's booming tones thundered.
"My power is needed to find the knowledge I seek,"
the man cried out. Pain was clear on his face as he held himself true.
"What knowledge do you seek to gain with this power?"
the figure snapped, his words the only thing that existed in that moment.
"I seek the failings of kings, gods, and myself,"
the man spat. Blood flew from his lips as his body trembled.
"Focus your fury,"
the figure roared above all else.
"Make it a single point as you envision the mission you have set yourself upon. You cannot transcend your anger until you know it yourself. Use it to burn all distraction away, for nothing exists but here and now."
The man's ragged throat howled in response as his master clenched the power in his outstretched hand. The birth and death of the universe surrounded them again and again as the eyes of 1,000 billion souls stared down in judgment. The sound of a clock's tick could be heard as the shattering of glass. In that instant, the room that was not a room disappeared, and the energy dissipated into nothingness, as though it had never been there to begin with. The man fell to his knees with a hacking wheeze as he clutched his chest and fell to the floor gasping. Blood dripped from his mouth onto the floor as he regained himself. The dark figure lowered his hand and placed it in a pocket in his roiling coat, as the two found themselves in a rough stone chamber. A copper circle surrounded them both as peace seemed to find itself where it had not been known before.
"You have gotten stronger, Nalagrom,"
the figure stated as he stared down at the fallen man. The cloaked man shakily pushed himself off of the floor. His whole body trembled violently as rough and painful gasps of air filled his lungs. He said nothing, as he could say nothing at this moment in time. I worry you have pushed yourself too hard today, my apprentice. You gain nothing if you die from overexertion. The figure stepped forward, holding out a hand to take. Not while there are weak men with power that need killing. Nalagram took the hand, rising to his feet as his body trembled from the effort.
Come on, Baladeth. You know I wouldn't give him the satisfaction.
As they spoke, a multitude of skeletons emerged from the dark corners bearing water, food, and towels. They beset themselves upon Nalagram as the cloaked man swiped a goblet and began drinking from it greedily. Be that as it may, you're going to need some rest after today's training, Baladeth replied plainly as a pair of ghostly hands floated beside him, holding a long scroll with a list of tasks to be done. Nalagram coughed as he placed the now empty cup on a silver tray and took a loaf of bread from another.
You act like I was gonna be able to do something after today's session.
Well, I was hoping you'd be able to get some tutoring done.
Fuck them kids.
Don't you start with me, you little shit, Baladeth replied with a squint in his eyes as he made his way to the exit. The mood shifted rapidly from the battle of energy that had just occurred. Nalagram took a generous bite from the loaf as he followed his master out of the room and into a much more developed hallway of brick. Blue torches lined the hall as ghosts could be seen floating in and out of the walls. He rolled his eyes as he chewed, eventually swallowing with another cough.
Look, I just don't get the youth of today, boss man. They're too placid, timid. They ain't got that moxie.
Maybe that's because they keep winding up dead in your class, Baladeth scoffed. Or have we forgotten about the FFF incident?
I did nothing to those young men that nature would not have done in due time.
Nalagram huffed as he swallowed the last bit of bread. He swiped a towel from one of the procession of skeletons and proceeded to pat himself dry.
For all this talk about restraint, we certainly don't bother teaching it to the horny simpletons.
All I know is that I'm still filling out paperwork, Baladeth muttered. As the two reached the end of the hallway, they found themselves at a large stone slab that, in their presence, made a loud grinding noise. Dust fell from the ceiling as it slowly rose upwards to reveal a circular chamber. As the two stepped into the room, the slab closed behind them. There was a low rumble and a shaking as the sensation of rising was felt between master and apprentice.
So where do we go from here?
Nalagram asked as the world quieted somewhat around them. His stance had gotten more steady, but his voice was still shaky. Well, after a mandatory rest period, we have a few options available, Baladeth replied. You can get back to teaching.
Yeah, nah, let's skip that for now.
Baladeth would have felt an eye twitch if he had a brow. He took a breath and continued. Or you can go to Heraldria. The apprentice tilted his head as he looked up at the figure.
We're doing some Duke Halloran shit, huh?
He's been making moves, which means we need to as well, Baladeth replied as a loud and resonant thud could be heard from the elevator. We've been complacent for too long. The forces of justice have been setting up footholds. A nasty, sharp-toothed smile found its way onto Nalagram's teeth as he almost rubbed his hands with glee.
Well then, I guess it's been a while since I've had a good performance.
Baladeth nearly grinned as well, though it would have been entirely impossible given that he had no mouth to smile with. I'll summon you when you have your orders ready. Don't screw this up, Nalagram. We'll only have one shot at a grand re-entry onto the scene.
Wouldn't dream of it, boss.